Yo guys, ready to dive into another awesome story? Before we start, make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the new content coming your way. Today's story synopsis is as follows. 10 years ago, a group of gods turned everyone on Earth into players of a twisted game that forced them to kill monsters in real life, or kill themselves. Kim Se-han quickly realizes how this game will play out. Everyone in the world will die, except for him. When he is given the chance to go back in time and start a second playthrough, Se-han is determined to change the course of events and beat the gods at their own game. The story begins with a message announcing that the player has completed the game, stating that the ending will be brief. It was finally over. 10 years ago, this world became the stage for a game, and just like in other games, the population had to survive and fight monsters to the death. They called those responsible for the quest the Game Masters, and it was obvious they weren't chosen to have fun. The beings who controlled this game were far beyond the skies, and the selected players were nothing more than entertainment for these so-called superior beings. Some of them appeared in spectral form, while others participated directly through avatars, players chosen by a god to act on their behalf. As a result, humanity was heading towards its end, which isn't exactly a new thing for humans. Lying on the ground, the protagonist states that this game is a cruel joke. After everything they had been through, the game's ending was the extinction of humanity. A massive joke. At the very least, he wanted to stand out in some way at the end. There was only one path for him to survive in this scenario, to escape this world through a wormhole created in the sky. An achievement is unlocked for the protagonist. It's called Bad Ending, the lonely world. He probably wasn't too happy to see that. He compares it to his current situation and states that if this wasn't considered a bad ending, he didn't even want to imagine what would be. He comments on the name The Lonely World, calling it captivating. The game congratulates him for completing all available quests in his single-player playthrough, and informs him that the server will shut down soon, thanking him for playing. So that was the ending. The protagonist remarks that the gods had no more use for him, and if he was going to end in such a pathetic way, he would rather take his own life. He aims his sword at his heart, intending to end it quickly. But before he could, another game message appears, stating that since he reached the end of his playthrough, the DLC shop is now available. For those who don't know, DLC refers to additional content for the original game. It is usually found in console games, so it made no sense for it to appear here. Pressing the message, he is notified that this product can be purchased using the points he has earned, and the only available content for him to buy is a second playthrough pack. He wonders if the gods knew about this. Disbelieving, he tells himself that they wouldn't give another chance for free if they could help it, and he still doesn't understand why this function only appeared now. But he accepts it, reasoning that, despite everything, this was still a game, and if this wasn't just a figment of his imagination, he was sure of one thing: he could turn the tables. The package costs 1 million points. Fortunately, the total points he has accumulated since he started playing amount to 1.7 million. It was a good thing he had saved up money for later in the game. As the content loads, he pleads for this not to be a lie. If he could truly start over, he could change everything from the very beginning. He could alter the ending planned by the gods. When the game announces that his first playthrough has ended and his second has begun, he wakes up on a park bench, realizing that he has finally returned. He soon notices that the status windows haven't been unlocked yet either. It had been a long time since this place had been peaceful. Someone calls out to him, asking what he's doing there. That person is Jisoo, a girl he was close to in college. She is a year younger than him, and always helped others. She would often come to talk to him when he was alone. They were on good terms, but he believes they never really opened up to each other until the end. She asks if he stayed up all night playing video games as usual and warns him that if he keeps this up, his grades will be a problem again this semester. He says it's fine and asks for the date. She replies that it's August 17th. So what the game told him wasn't a lie. He had returned to the first day when it all began. And this is where the story starts to get more interesting. Seeing his strange expression, she asks if he's still not fully awake. He thinks to himself that he had been playing a non-stop life-or-death game. She reminds him that classes start next week, and out of nowhere, he thanks her for everything. The protagonist is deeply grateful to Jisoo, and not just because she looked out for him. She then asks if he wants to go somewhere, but before he can answer, they spot Jonghyun Lee. This guy has a habit of chasing after Jisoo, and sees the protagonist as a gaming addict. Sahan tries to remember what happened to this guy in the first playthrough but fails, which means he probably didn't even make it past the first stage. The protagonist answers her question by saying that, as far as he's concerned, they could stay there peacefully. She is surprised by his direct response, since just days ago, he couldn't even look her in the eye. Even so, she doesn't feel entirely comfortable with the situation. It would be annoying if Lee came over to talk to her. That's when the protagonist suddenly remembers that right after her last remark, the monsters started appearing. And sure enough, it happens. Jisoo thinks it's a movie shoot, but the protagonist immediately notices the massive number of goblins appearing nearby. The people around them are confused, wondering what's going on. They assume the goblins are just people in costumes, and what surprises them the most is how someone could be that size in a costume. Some even speculate that they might be child actors. As they observed a group of people near the goblins, they noticed that most of them were paralyzed, as a boy had been stabbed by one of them. And then the attack began. Terrified by what had happened, the crowd started fleeing, but this was the worst decision they could have made, since goblins, being weaker than a normal man, took advantage of attacking from behind. One of the goblins jumped in his direction, and his friend stood in front of him to protect him. Back then, the protagonist was just weak and fearful, which is why, in the first playthrough, he had frozen behind her. But in this time, he charged at the goblin, struck it in the face, stole its dagger, and killed it. A new message appeared in the game, saying that he was the first player to defeat a goblin at this stage, and that his synchronization was now complete, and his second playthrough had just begun. Another message appeared, but this time for all the people present. It greeted them and informed them that they had been invited to the game of the gods, and from now on, they must become players and complete the main mission. There would be penalties for those who failed to comply, and for more information, they were advised to check the player instructions. The protagonist reminded himself that this game was only for the gods' amusement, and if he suddenly stood out from the others, he would attract attention, so it was better to be careful since the gods watched in public through a floating eye called the Observer, a not-so-creative name, but anyway. They were the eyes of the gods and the game masters, and they could change their appearance depending on the user and purpose, but they were generally similar to floating black eyes. If he started to stand out, it could affect the difficulty of the mission levels. The gods weren't the type to make things easier, as long as they could make the game harder. He should avoid doing things that would make him overshadow the others. He then started strangling another goblin that charged at him, while his friend commented that it was hard to process everything that was happening, but she was starting to understand, especially since there was no way those monsters could just appear out of nowhere in reality. And above all, the notifications and voices in their heads were strange too. Poor girl probably thought she was becoming schizophrenic. The protagonist responded that it probably meant the reality they knew before was no longer the same, as she had never seen such notifications and messages in real life. She agreed with him. Sahan noticed that she was calm about the situation. She said that this was her intention, and asked why he was so calm about it too. Then the first main mission appeared. It instructed them to escape the college campus. It had a difficulty level of E and a time limit of 2 days. A large number of goblins would start attacking from now on. They would have to either defeat or avoid them, and successfully escape the campus. The rewards would vary depending on their achievements, and the participation of each player present was recommended. The protagonist then comments on the difficulty level and the long time limit for the mission, thinking it would be easy to handle. He tells his friend that they should talk later, and that they needed to move before the goblins attacked them. The goblins charge toward them, and he grabs his friend's hand, and they escape from the group. Many people were struck down as they fled, but they couldn't help anyone at the moment. They eventually reached the safe zone of the stage. He remembers how shaken he was during his first playthrough, and how he had gotten there purely by luck. His friend asks what he thinks this place is, and he tells her that, if this were a game, this would be the place where the monsters couldn't enter, the famous safe zones in games. The goblins try to get through, but they fail, proving his hypothesis. The protagonist suggests they stay there for a while before moving on, and she agrees. First, the protagonist needed to arm Jisoo appropriately before leaving, at least enough so that she could handle a goblin on her own. Sometime later, 2 people were running from the goblins, and a mysterious figure killed the monsters, saving them. The 2 were surprised to find out that the person who saved them was Jisoo Han. 3 hours ago, during a conversation between the protagonist and his friend, Sahan advised staying there for a while before heading out to take action, and she agreed. The protagonist was still uneasy about being constantly watched for the amusement of the gods. They chose their favorite player and watched everything they did during the missions. This was how they enjoyed the game. There was an eye watching them, but it had only been observing them for half an hour. The protagonist soon recognized that it was Arcadis, and his impatience was the reason he couldn't become one of the best game masters. Arcadis, bored, decided to open his system to check on things. He was immediately shocked by the immense brightness emanating from it. Judging by the fact that his friend hadn't noticed anything, it only appeared to him. Upon closer inspection, he realized it looked like an internet browser, a forum used by the gods. There were general discussions, and what caught his attention most was a chat room, which seemed to operate like a normal internet chat, a kind of celestial Twitter. As he read the messages, he noticed a discussion about the global servers of the game, which impressed him with the access to information he now had. He then opened the store and looked for some weapons and equipment for them. While the protagonist was distracted by his shopping, someone was calling everyone to gather by the gate, saying that they didn't know what was happening, but that if everyone stayed together, they would be fine. Soon, that person was joined by a group of others, and together they fought off the remaining monsters. His friend asked if they were just going to stay there forever, and he replied that it was time for them to leave. She commented that she was hungry, and asked them to hurry up. The protagonist thought to himself that she wasn't asking many questions, which made things easier for him, as it would be strange to explain everything he knew to her. The protagonist then hands her the dagger he had stolen from the goblin. As she takes it, she asks how he would manage without a weapon. He replies that he will simply grab another one, and that she's more vulnerable than him. She thanks him, and he mentions that the dagger doesn't have much durability, as it's not a sword, but it should be enough for her to defend herself for now. He then gives her a special brooch that would speed up her healing and increase the points earned by 20%. She asks where he found the item, which seemed like something from an RPG game. He responds that it dropped when he defeated the goblin and asks how she knew it was an item. Jisoo answers that normally he wouldn't give her a regular accessory in a situation like this, and it would be strange if he were carrying a brooch with no reason. After all, they couldn't forget that they were in a game, literally, as if they were not in a game, right? The protagonist thinks to himself that this small item cost him 10,000 points, and now he had spent a total of 20,000 points on items for both of them. As expected, the DLC store items were on a different level from the normal store items, more expensive but offering more significant effects. After all, even though reality had become a game, based on his previous experience, spending 20,000 points on a healing item was worth it, especially with the added bonus of increasing earned points by 20%. It was a good deal. Together, they leave the safe zone. He then gives her instructions, telling her that they need to leave now, and reminds her to focus on defense. Elsewhere, at a meeting table, a mysterious figure comments that those humans they were watching were fascinating. The players in their area simply died while trying to pray, which ruined the fun. Another figure present comments that all the players in their area had gone insane and started shooting at everything around them. Then, they ask about Arcadis' area, to which he responds that there was one person in particular who caught his interest. He shows an image of the protagonist and his friend taking down goblins, mentioning something about a celestial hunter. She then leads toward the remaining goblins. She recalls the plan he had passed to her, where the protagonist said that for a large group of goblins, there should be a leader in charge, as that's how it typically worked in most games. She seems a bit reluctant about the plan, but to convince her, he talks about wildlife documentaries, saying that jungle animals also have leaders. She agrees with his comment, and he continues the plan, stating that the leader should be the boss of this mission, and if he isn't defeated, it would be difficult to escape. She asks if he wants to take down the leader alone, and he explains that this is why he needs her help. After all, one hand washes the other, right? The plan goes into action. While she runs toward the goblins, she uses a potion that attracts weaker monsters around her. Once she has drawn the goblins into a specific area, she will use another potion she grabbed. As she followed the steps of the plan, Lee was running from the monsters, calling for help below her. She remembered when she was talking to the protagonist, asking if it was really necessary to defeat the leader, since the mission's goal was simply to escape. To defend his point, he commented that if it were a real game, the rewards would be much better, with a large number of survivors remaining. Remembering this, she headed toward the monsters chasing Lee, and took them down. The first thing Lee asked was how she managed to do that, and she briefly regretted helping him, questioning why he hadn't thanked her first. The effects of the potion started kicking in, and she kept telling herself that she wouldn't let the goblins pass her. Meanwhile, Sahan was searching for the boss, wondering if his friend was doing well. Soon, he encountered a giant goblin. He greeted the boss, claiming it had been a long time since they last met, about 10 years. The goblin, confused, tried to attack him, but Sahan distributed 20 points to his agility, dodging the attack with a leap. The jump was so great that the monster couldn't find him, and Sahan landed on its head, delivering a punch directly into its eye. Memories of the many people who had died by the sword raised by this boss flooded his mind. This time would be different. He then allocated 10 points to his strength and threw a stone at the arm holding the sword. When the sword fell, he advanced toward it, grabbed it, and jumped again, slashing the creature's head off in one swift motion. Vapt. A new message appeared, informing him of a new record for defeating the hidden boss of the stage, granting him the Hobgoblin belt and 500 extra points. The protagonist commented that the reward seemed fair for a boss of that level. The belt increased his strength by 10 points. He thought he'd allocate his points later when he needed them. The god soon discovered the fast defeat of the boss, and he realized he needed to hurry and leave before an observer appeared. When he arrived at the designated location, something seemed off. The goblins were supposed to be there already, and the potion she used should have lasted 5 minutes. Then, the monster started running toward him, but ignored him entirely. They looked so scared that they were just fleeing. He immediately grew worried about his friend and ran to find her. She was eventually found on a bridge surrounded by dead monster corpses, the goblins that had been fleeing from her. The protagonist was shocked by how she looked, like a deadly machine. However, upon noticing his presence, she returned to normal. He asked what had happened and about the potion. She tried to explain that when she passed among the fallen people, she helped them, but they became unconscious at some point during the fight. She assumed that the goblins must have scared them so much. He retorted that she was probably the reason they passed out, not the goblins. She was a little surprised, but he quickly told her to forget it. The protagonist then thought there was something strange about her and asked to see her status window, sending a request to view her information. When she accepted, he noticed that her stats were better than average, but there was something abnormal. The Celestial Hunter status appeared, an ultra-rare passive skill ranked SS. He had only seen it once during his first run, on a man named Blood Demon, who came from another world called Gene, where mystical martial arts techniques existed. He met him during a mission. This skill had a side effect, causing its user to lose control of themselves and unleash their full power. Jisoo hadn't shown any of these characteristics yet, but he needed to keep an eye on her. She then asked what he thought this ability was, and he tried to think of a way to explain it to her without scaring her. He decided to give her the necessary information, explaining that it basically made her stronger when she saw blood. She commented that it sounded like a somewhat scary ability, and brought the bloody dagger close to her face, making her eyes turn red. The protagonist quickly took the dagger from her, and warned that it was a skill that could put her in danger if overused. He asked her to be careful, appearing genuinely worried. Based on her performance, it seemed like this ability had merged with the effect of the brooch he had given her, resulting in an incredibly high regeneration rate. He then proposed that they form a contract, and she agreed. This agreement to form a group would allow them to share abilities. If he did this correctly, he should become stronger than before. A message appeared asking if he would accept her as a group member and activate ability sharing. He tried to confirm, but the game warned him that he had no abilities available to share. There was an ability that would be perfect for her, but the protagonist wouldn't be able to get it until much later in the game. Lee then woke up, and the protagonist asked what he was doing there. He responded rudely, and Jisoo pointed the dagger at his neck, threatening him to speak more politely. When things calmed down, the protagonist commented that most people should be in a group by now, and asked why Lee was alone with a girl. He answered that he was on patrol with her, and added that if one of them encountered trouble, the other could escape and inform the group members. The protagonist then asked to be taken to their leader, and Lee responded again rudely, questioning why he should obey his orders. It was then that a goblin jumped toward them, and the protagonist dealt with the monster in just one strike, leaving Lee both surprised and scared. He commented that goblins always target the weakest, and asked if Lee wanted to be left alone there. Lee then offered to show them the way to his leader. At least, he wasn't completely useless. As they headed toward the group, the protagonist asked if he was leading them to the right place. Lee answered that they had settled in the academy. Finally, they arrived, and as they entered the building, they noticed many injured people. Most of them had likely been wounded during the initial attack. The leader of this group must have rescued these people while they were likely confused. He had to be a calm and reliable person, with a reputation good enough that the gods had probably noticed him. Only one person in this field fit that description, the student council president, Hyun Jae-yun. He was an intelligent and handsome person, and since he had shown leadership skills, the gods would likely be paying attention to him. He would be considered at least a rare avatar, and no, it wasn't that type of blue avatar you're thinking of. But thinking it through, he probably had been killed by a giant blow in his past life. He likely had a number of requests given the number of observers following him, and he probably was cautious. The protagonist wasn't sure if the gods were trustworthy, or if becoming an avatar was in his best interest. Upon noticing the protagonist's presence, the president called out to Lee and approached to check if he and Jisoo were okay. The protagonist quickly told them to skip the formalities, insisting that they needed to leave immediately. The president questioned why and who he was, to which the protagonist introduced himself as Sahan Kim. The president acknowledged him and asked for the reason behind his urgency. Sahan replied that it was because the monster leader was already dead. He was certain that the president had received a notification from the system about the death of the hobgoblin, the monster leader, and mentioned that the regular goblins were now disoriented due to the sudden disappearance of their leader. The president confirmed that he had indeed seen the notification. Sahan continued, saying they should take advantage of this moment to escape the campus. After all, the mission's goal was to escape, and if the president checked again, he could see the mission's time limit. He then explained that the reality they were in wasn't the same as before. It seemed like someone had thrown them into the game for their own entertainment. The president asked if Sahan knew anything about this, and Sahan replied that he wasn't sure, but was only guessing based on the current situation. However, one thing was certain, whoever these people were, they definitely weren't on their side. Sahan thought to himself that the president was as much of a novice at this game as anyone else. His words only confirmed this. He hadn't even turned into an avatar yet, and Sahan still needed to convince him to leave quickly. Now that the goblin leader was dead and fewer people were dying, the gods would likely start getting bored. Sahan didn't know what the gods might do, but he knew they would lose interest once the situation became more comfortable for the players. For now, they had probably realized that the leader had been killed, and they would be looking for something else to entertain them. In a conversation with the protagonist, the president understood that what mattered most was completing the mission. So escaping was indeed the right choice. Sahan confirmed and emphasized that they needed to leave as soon as possible. Yun, the president, mentioned that they would have to take some actions on their own since they hadn't been able to contact anyone outside. Then another person interrupted the conversation, questioning the protagonist about leaving. This person argued that the best thing they could do was wait for a rescue at the location, claiming they shouldn't leave and put themselves in danger. He then appealed to the president, asking if he believed in this unknown person. The person who interrupted the conversation was called the Rat, Dongwon Park. It was hard for Sahan to forget him, as this person had caused him a lot of trouble in his past life. The president contradicted Park, saying they could only be rescued if the police intervened, but so far, there was no sign of anyone. He then argued that the president was risking the lives of everyone there. Upon realizing that Park was acting the same way as he did before, Sahan now had an idea of what happened to the president during the first run. Park then introduced himself as the vice president of the student council, a position that wasn't exactly convenient for him. Park then claimed that from what he had just heard, the protagonist was talking nonsense about escaping the location, questioning why Sahan thought it was ridiculous. Sahan asked why he found it ridiculous, to which Park defended himself by saying that most of the people there were injured, and that the protagonist seemed to have lost some fear after having the luck to kill a few monsters. However, Park argued that those creatures were beyond human comprehension, and without proper equipment, escaping would be impossible. It would be better for most people to wait for the military or police to help them. The protagonist thought this was a valid opinion, at least if it had come from an ordinary person. However, he already knew the type of person Park was. A psychopath who infiltrated all kinds of groups and enjoyed making the members turn on each other from the inside out. He didn't care about the deaths of others as long as it ended well for him. He was a monster disguised as a human. This time, Sahan wouldn't fall for his schemes. Jisoo then questioned Park's comment about their luck in killing the goblins, asking if he had even seen how they killed them. She pointed out that waiting for help out of fear would be a mistake. The military and police were unavailable, and they had no idea when or if they'd be able to help. Park tried to appeal, saying that most of the people there wouldn't accept it, but the protagonist intervened, suggesting that Park could stay behind if he wanted. He hadn't expected to convince everyone, and if Park chose to stay, it wouldn't be a problem. Sahan then thought to himself that if this was the Park he knew, he wouldn't accept staying behind. Park's goal would likely be to kill everyone at the location to rack up extra points for kills. This was the exact opposite of Sahan's plan, which was to gain extra rewards by saving others. Sahan asked once again if Park would stay there. The president then declared that he would follow Sahan out of the location. Park, realizing he had no choice, agreed to follow the president. Park was already aware of the game's scoring system, which indicated that he had become a chosen avatar, a member of the group. As they exited the academy, Jisuan asked Sahan if it was really okay to leave in this way. Sahan confirmed and added that they would be able to leave since nothing special would happen. Park's presence was unsettling, but Sahan knew he couldn't deal with him immediately. There were still too many eyes watching, and he could use Park later. The group members seemed nervous as they passed by the goblins, but the president reassured them that they would be fine as long as they stuck together. Just then, the game sent a notification, surprising the protagonist. It notified him that the mission's difficulty had increased from rank E to rank D. An earthquake occurred, and they quickly realized that a giant minotaur had appeared in front of them. The protagonist was shocked, as this monster usually didn't appear until mission number 15. The fact that they had sent a sentinel like the minotaur at this point in the game meant they wanted people dead. But since it was still the first mission, there should be a limit to the power of the sentinel. Its stats hadn't exceeded rank F. Panic spread as people began to run, and the minotaur charged at one person. In less than 10 seconds, the minotaur had already killed 2 people from their group. The monster was around 5 meters tall, a creature that turned people into pieces of meat without needing a weapon. The reason for the difficulty increase was still unknown. The president didn't know how to escape the situation and wasn't sure if running was the only solution. The protagonist responded by saying that someone needed to create a distraction, and he would be the bait. The president tried to stop him, but the protagonist insisted that no one else was capable of doing it. Despite the situation, there were no signs of nervousness on the protagonist's face. He was reacting with optimism in the face of danger, which impressed Yun, who had always considered himself a rational person, while Sahan was operating on a whole different level, literally the protagonist of this situation. The protagonist signaled that he would provide the distraction, and then charged at the minotaur, wearing a red cloak. Once he caught the minotaur's attention, it became distracted by him, and the signal was given. Everyone managed to escape. During the escape, the president was impressed by the protagonist's evasion skills, but his attention was quickly drawn to one of his friends. Realizing he couldn't afford to be distracted, the group advanced toward the main gate, passed through, and completed the mission. In his past life, the protagonist was weak. There were many more talented players than him, and he wanted to survive, so he had to fend for himself. However, even though he pulled off such a feat, it still wouldn't have been worth it if he were alone. Since he was starting over, an alternate ending wasn't necessarily a bad thing. He stood up and began to fight seriously against the sentinel. It was a beautiful and short fight. There were no more observers around. He then told the minotaur to bring its best attack. Upon completing the mission, he received a platinum ranking for helping people escape, volunteering as bait, and defeating a boss and a sentinel. Even though it was the highest rank, he still felt disappointed. He wished that at least one of the rewards would be a weapon, since he didn't have anything decent yet, or even a useful skill. Anything would have been better than more consumables or experience points. When leaving the campus, his friend was waiting for him, which surprised him since he expected her to follow the others. He asked if she had been worried about him. She denied it, explaining that since they formed a group, she could check the status of other group members. She saw that he was still standing after being hit by the minotaur, so she understood he was okay. She then asked what ranking he received for defeating the minotaur. It was what she expected, and she proudly mentioned that she got gold. The protagonist received his mission rewards, a skill called self-sacrifice, an adaptive orichalcum, another skill called final hour, and one more called regeneration. All these skills could be enhanced, and in addition to them, he earned 1,000 points, a great profit. He couldn't believe he had gained these 2 difficult-to-obtain skills. It must have been a bonus for hunting monsters. He believed he was the first player to have killed a Sentinel. Skills that could be improved and had a lot of potential later in the game, but it was still disappointing that they weren't S-rank like the Celestial Hunter skill. Another message arrived for him. It was about the second mission, which said he was to embark on a journey to the Lomi world and defeat the bosses. Leaving the university behind, he had taken his first step into a new world. Now, he was supposed to defeat the monsters occupying the Lomi World Tower, with a difficulty level of C and a time limit of 14 days. It was the same mission he had during his first playthrough. The protagonist asked his friend if that group had already gone to the tower, and she confirmed. He then asked why she hadn't gone with them, and if she planned on waiting for him, she could have been there. She said she didn't like being in a crowd, especially didn't like being near Park. In any case, she should relax for a while since there weren't many observers around them. He then asked her if she had become a chosen avatar. She denied, and he asked why, since probably a god had explained to her the benefits of becoming an avatar if they sent her a request. She replied that she didn't want to serve someone she couldn't even look in the eye, and the name, Avatar, wasn't something nice to hear. He commented that her personality had changed. She seemed to have a good head on her shoulders. It was a little hard to say if it was due to the influence of the Celestial Hunter, but she hadn't shown any after effects yet. Even the Blood Demon couldn't fully rid himself of the after effects of that ability. His friend continued saying that it would be pointless at the moment. He then asked how many requests she had received, and she said 12, which indicated competition. The protagonist decided to train her to prevent her from becoming an avatar of the gods. The first skill she would learn would be a specialized killing technique that only Celestial Hunter users could master, Crimson Azura. It was a skill he couldn't master earlier because he wasn't a Celestial Hunter. A few hours ago, the protagonist used one of his abilities called Final Hour, which made his movements faster for a limited time. It lasted for 5 seconds in a group of goblins. It exponentially increased his attack power and agility. It was a skill that killed 2 birds with 1 stone, and since it could be improved, its duration could be extended. He was attacked from behind by a goblin, got a cut on his hand, which triggered his regeneration ability. Unlike the previous one, it was passive, meaning it activated on its own. And when combined with the other abilities, his regenerative power increased to 50%. The protagonist then asked his friend if she wanted to share abilities. She agreed, and they went together to a cafe. He opened the interface and shared his regeneration ability, and she the Celestial Hunter skill. The last one wouldn't be a bad choice, but the regeneration one would be more effective for her. However, the game notified them that due to the low friendship level between group members, he would only be able to use 30% of the maximum capacity of the ability. These effects could go up to 80% depending on their level. Jisoo comments that it's good to obtain skills immediately in the way they're doing, but it's a bit concerning not to have an offensive skill. The protagonist replies that regeneration is a good enough skill to be considered offensive. It's a good survival skill. For example, in an attack that requires dodging, it becomes unnecessary once your regeneration is fast enough. While he trained her skill, he went into the online forum, which was much more active than the last time. When he entered the chat, he noticed a conversation between 2 gods. He immediately recognized one of them as an honest life. It was just a nickname since the god was the complete opposite of honesty. It must have been Park's god. Judging by the way they were talking, it seemed the president was keeping it under control, and it also looked like a small conversation. He asked if he could see, and the god agreed, then invited him to be an observer. Upon accepting the invitation, he saw a destroyed location with a girl hiding. A man appeared saying that he could hear her, and asked if she was okay. When he said it was dangerous to stay in a place like that, she started screaming. The protagonist stated that he had found what he needed for the Lomi Tower, the crucial key to defeat the monsters. Enjoying the story so far? Then leave a like to support and comment on what you think. Don't forget to subscribe, so you don't miss the upcoming stories. As the protagonist and his friend were walking, she asked if they weren't heading in the opposite direction of the tower. He confirmed and added that there was a place he needed to stop by before heading there. There was something they needed to complete the second mission. There were no observers in that area, which probably meant there were a few survivors around. She noticed the streets were somewhat destroyed, probably after the monsters appeared there. The protagonist responded that it was partially true. Most of the destruction had been caused by humans. It was a familiar place to him, so his friend would probably find it shocking. The monster had no reason to destroy human structures. She soon understood what he meant and added that it must have happened due to the uselessness of laws now and the lack of police and military around. She then asked if he thought this was the primal nature of humans. He replied that civilization hadn't been completely destroyed yet, stating this after seeing that TV news was still working. A goblin jumped behind Jisoo. The protagonist warned about the threat, and she simply responded with a reflex, killing it with her dagger to its throat. She complained that too much blood had been spilled, and he asked if that was why she was worried. She claimed that she couldn't finish cleaning her blade because it got dirty so quickly. It would be nice to change weapons. He commented that it seemed like she killed the goblin in one hit, and she replied that there must have been extra damage when directed at humanoid enemies. He confirmed, saying it increased by 30% for him and 100% for her. She should be extremely strong, even for someone who just completed the first stage. He warned her that they would find a weapon as soon as they found the person he was looking for. They had just arrived at the location, the bank. She asked why they were at a bank, wondering if he was looking for money. He stated that money in the current world was useless. There was nothing to buy with it. They would benefit more from points instead. He soon explained that they were there to look for someone who would be truly needed for the second stage. Upon entering, they found a police officer defending the place from thieves. This officer didn't seem like an ordinary person and quickly defeated all the thieves inside. Jisoo said he was very good and asked the protagonist if this was the person they were looking for. He confirmed, and she continued, saying that he had defeated the thieves, even knowing they were players too, and asked if he was using the special item. He replied that it could be the case, but there must have been a fundamental reason, as he was a chosen avatar. The officer, noticing their presence, approached and asked if they had business with the bank. He said it was very dangerous around there, and recommended they evacuate to a safer place, as there would be many thieves, given it was a bank. The protagonist said they didn't have any business with a bank, and that it was hard to imagine a bank operating like this at the moment. He then asked why they were looking for shelter. The officer denied it, saying he was there to see him, and called him Mina Lee. The officer seemed shocked when his name was mentioned, and he claimed he didn't know what they were talking about, stating that his name was Jeonkyul Nam. Jisoo grabbed his wrist and said he had gotten faster, indicating that he was bothered. Analyzing his dilated pupils, she claimed that he was surprised when her friend called his name. It would be strange for him to be surprised to hear a name he had never heard before, just as she expected from her friend, who had already predicted everything. The protagonist asked if he would speak if he were in their place, and urged him to reveal his special ability. The supposed officer turned out to be the girl who had screamed when found in the rubble of the bank. She had knocked the officer unconscious, and used her special ability to transform into him. It was the perfect plan. Then, transforming back into her original form as a girl, she asked what they wanted, claiming to be a very busy person. The protagonist questioned how someone so busy could be robbing a bank. It was such a low act. She tried to justify herself, but his friend asked what was going on, and if this ability was some kind of transformation. He confirmed, saying that it had to be her ability. She could transform into another person or any object. He couldn't explain it to her, but luckily, she didn't ask any more questions like that. Jisoo asked why he thought she was robbing a bank. Before, she seemed to be helping people. The girl replied that she had been helping them, transforming into a police officer so people would trust her. She could convince others that she was strong in her form as a high school student. The protagonist claimed she was the one who brought the thieves to that place. Mina and Park were the best manipulators around. The girl then asked if he was going to turn her in to the authorities. He denied it, saying the police had practically all left, and she would easily escape anyway. She then asked again what he wanted. He said he needed her to accompany them for a while, until they completed the second mission. Mina, full of herself, claimed she was already at stage 31, and asked him what stage he was at, and which monsters he had defeated. He replied that it was none of her business, and asked her to just decide whether or not she was coming. She refused, questioning why she should go. He then flicked her forehead, sending her flying, and told her to have good manners. The girl got angry, and tried to strike him, but Jisoo blocked her punch. Mina tried to transform again, but failed. She then realized that her transformation ability couldn't be activated if her concentration was interrupted by pain. She reinforced her friend's words, saying that they all needed to have good manners, and that everyone was civilized there. She finally agreed and joined them. While walking, the girl asked if she could ask if they were avatars like her. They denied it, and asked her to stop speaking so politely. It didn't suit her. She thanked them, and asked how they were so strong. The protagonist explained that not always was an avatar stronger than a player. Despite everything, becoming an avatar would make the path to getting stronger easier. However, what mattered more was the equipment. Good stats weren't everything. She needed items to compensate. Jisoo asked her friend if it was possible for them to find appropriate equipment. Everything seemed lost, and there didn't seem to be a proper store nearby. He confirmed and asked her to take a look, and they then entered a safe zone together. He replied that there was always a way, and ordered the point store to open. A giant purple door appeared in front of them. Mina was surprised when he did this. Noticing her surprise, he asked how a chosen avatar didn't know this. She said she had no idea a place like this existed. The protagonist thought to himself that the gods should have told her, given the importance of the items, but knowing her character, it was to be expected. The young jester was notorious for being sadistic. The protagonist said he discovered it by luck, and that she had just started, so she shouldn't be frustrated by it. He asked them to pay attention to what he was going to say now. This was their last chance to get a weapon before the second stage, and urged them to try to get the most useful ones they could. This was the time to prepare properly. As he expected, most of the weapons were common, even though they had been made to be the beauty of the game. To improve their situation, they didn't have potions. People had the highest chance of surviving early on if they had access to them. Soon players should be able to craft their own potions and weapons, but it was almost impossible to buy good equipment, so he should be grateful for this. He was going to buy something decent this time. He gave his friend an armor piece, saying it was to protect her heart, and asked her to put it on right away. He mentioned she probably didn't have points to spend yet, since she had just started, and asked her to pay him back later. She thanked him, and said she would do that soon. He then asked what kind of weapon she wanted. Among the various options, she chose the mace, a blunt weapon. She was surprised by the large amount of points, and asked how he had managed to gather so many. He replied that where there's a will, there's a way, and said it was all her fault. They decided to test their weapons on some nearby monsters. The protagonist realized his power was so strong that he sliced through a goblin and the wall behind it with his sword. Previously, he had been thinking about trying out the platinum level reward he earned when he got a new weapon. So, he gave the adaptive orichalcum a chance. It was a versatile item that could be used in its solid or liquid form, and could be applied to another piece of equipment as a coating. When the coating was removed, it would return to its original form. This item could change shape and be used however he wanted, so the protagonist decided to apply it to his sword, enhancing it while keeping its original weight. After the tests, they finally reached level 2, the Lomi Tower. Jisoo was surprised by how normal she seemed. The girl replied that she was supposed to be normal by now. Even though it was a bit late, she still asked the protagonist what the second mission was about. He replied that it was to defeat the boss of the stage. She didn't expect that kind of mission. He asked what she thought it would be, and she answered that it was just a battle royale for them. That explained why this mission had ended so quickly. It was a mission where everyone involved would kill each other until the number of players was reduced enough. The protagonist interrupted the conversation, saying he spotted someone and told them to hide behind the walls. Jisoo asked what they were doing there, wondering if the protagonist thought they were just guarding the area. He replied that they were just investigating. She didn't understand, as there were no monsters around. He explained that they weren't looking for monsters, but people from the outside, just like them. If their mission were competitive, like a battle royale, all the care they were taking would make sense. He then told Mina that when he referred to them, he was talking only about him and Jisoo. She wasn't included. The girl said she didn't understand where he was going with that, and asked if he wanted her to transform to gather information. He confirmed, saying it would be a quicker way. The second guy noticed his partner's disappearance, and questioned where he could have gone at that time. He threatened to report it if the other kept acting like that. Mina then transformed into him. Her partner said the shift was almost over, and they entered the tower. When they entered the tower, they headed to the last floor. One of the people in the group commented that they would be defeating the boss. Upon arriving at the location, they were shocked by the size of the creature that was designated as the second-level boss. They were at a loss for how to defeat it due to its colossal size, so they decided to retreat. However, some couldn't escape before it began attacking. As they reached the exit door, it was locked by the creature. It then finished off everyone present. While the boss was obviously terrifying, the real problem lay in the mission's requirements. Only players who started from the same location could enter the boss room together. In other words, they needed to be on the same level, and since there was a penalty for failing the mission, no one wanted to lose the chance to back out. This made sense, so the team that had started the mission late was occupying the subway. Upon arriving at the subway, the protagonist recognized Lee. Kim asked him how he managed to survive with his stats being the same as before. He replied that it was just his luck. The protagonist said that he seemed more humble since the last time they met. Jisoo remarked that it was only natural after seeing how he fought like a minotaur in that way. The protagonist said it was good to find him, and asked to see the student council president again. He then led them inside the base. Many observers were present due to the large number of people. Mina noticed people were staring at him a lot, and asked what he had done in the first level to make them look at him like that. He replied that he had only taken care of a monster to let everyone escape. She asked what kind of monster it was, and he said it was a minotaur, a sentinel. The president spotted him from afar and shouted his name. He was happy that he had survived, asked if he was hurt, and ran to give him a hug. After explaining how they ended up underground with the other team that was doing the mission, they learned that the other team had been defeated and were in disbelief, as the other team was stronger than theirs. The protagonist then said that now it was more than possible with them there. A mysterious armed figure was heading toward the tower. There is only one boss of this level, and when two teams are trying to defeat it, the losing team will be penalized. The punishment for failure during the mission is the death penalty. In a conversation with the president, the protagonist asked if he had said that the other team knew about the level of the stage. He agreed, explaining that they were the ones who had said the boss's location was at the top of the tower. He then told them to let them handle it. Yun questioned the mission, as if they didn't manage to defeat the monster, they would be finished. However, the protagonist said that this would only be the case if the monster at the top was the real boss, and asked why he was so sure of that. The president explained that if he had seen the video the group showed about the colossal creature, which seemed to be far beyond a normal monster, he would understand his side. When he entered the tower, he received a notification mentioning that he had entered the boss level, and when they searched all the floors, they found no trace of another monster in the tower. The protagonist then asked if they had searched the underground part of the location. Kim explained that there was a big difference between a boss and a regular monster, continuing that a boss builds its own group and keeps them around itself. The mysterious armed figure soon revealed himself to be the leader of the group fighting against the creature at the top of the tower. One of his subordinates went to him and said that there were people wanting to see him. He asked if they were the same weak ones from before, to which the subordinate confirmed and added that this time there were others with them. In the previous conversation, Park stated that he wanted to join them. The protagonist asked if he had decided to start believing in him now. He defended himself by saying that since they had no chance of defeating the boss, he thought focusing on the underground instead of the monster at the top was the right idea. His personality was terrible, but he had a sharp mind, and the protagonist could definitely use him for something. The president said he agreed to go, but asked if he was really sure, as he had heard that most of the people in that group were criminals, and they had women and children who had been with them since the beginning. During the first playthrough, there were many groups in Korea, one of which stood out specifically for its strength, an infamous group formed by a bunch of criminals who escaped from prison as soon as the world changed. They were called the Sins, and the man who created this group was Jaewon Kim. The leader of the criminal group approached them and asked what they wanted to talk about. Most of the members of this group thought they were looking for a fight and started provoking one. However, the president said they were only there to make a suggestion. He then said they had reached a consensus in their group and agreed that they should leave the boss at the top of the floor for them. He tried to convince him by lying, saying they were waiting for them to kill the boss in the hope that another one would spawn and they would then take action. Jaewon threatened them if they were lying and released his dark aura. This aura was omnipresent. No matter how many times the protagonist felt it, it was the aura of the avatar of one of the strongest gods, the avatar of Hades. The president offered to stay as a hostage, but Park intervened, saying he would take his place since the group needed him. The leader of the criminal group disagreed and said that everyone should stay, especially Jisoo, and launch chains to bind her. However, the protagonist stepped in front of her, stopping the attack. He probably should have felt something from Jisoo. He probably didn't know she was a celestial hunter, but still, he sensed something. At that moment, Jisoo released her aura, which took the shape of a flower devouring a man, leaving him in complete shock. Kim asked her to stop, and she apologized, saying she had only gotten angry. Jaewon then accepted their offer, and Park stayed as the hostage. The leader of the criminal group was furious about the situation and promised to himself that he would complete the mission so they would die. The president confessed that he had been worried, but he was grateful that everything turned out well. However, he was still a bit concerned about Park. The protagonist reassured him, saying there was no need to worry, and told him to start preparing now. He then directed them to the safe zone, informing them that they could now buy all the items they needed. Yun asked if the protagonist thought the other group would leave them alone after killing the boss, and he disagreed, but said there was no reason to worry. There wouldn't be many things to worry about once they finished. After finishing a phone call, his friend asked who he was talking to. He replied that it was someone he needed to call. Jisoo kept appearing near him without him noticing her presence. She noticed some items on the ground and asked what they were for. He answered that they were the items they would use. She noticed some strange rings and asked what they were for. The protagonist said they were training bracelets. She asked if he was going to train using them, and he denied, saying someone else would use them. Kim asked if she had finished preparing, and she replied that all she needed was basic armor and her mace. Then, they went to meet the president. She commented that she didn't know the protagonist could use a spear. He admitted he knew a bit, but couldn't explain how he had learned it in his past life. All he remembered was hoping that person was doing things right. Jisoo continued asking him questions, and the last one was about which weapon he mastered the most. He answered that none in particular, none of them suited him. He wasn't particularly good at anything, everything was mediocre. But when your victory and survival are at stake, talent isn't entirely essential, at least not for him. After all, he was the only one who survived among the best of the best, and until the end of humanity. This time, he would possibly become the strongest in the world. The president approached him, commenting that he was equipped appropriately. He thanked him, saying he had used his gold prize from the first mission. It seemed that he had also become an avatar, probably not an evil god considering his personality. Then, he asked if the others were ready. He confirmed and added that he was there to inform them that they would start moving. The protagonist said that he and his friend would need to move separately on the way to take care of a few things. He then handed the president his spear, telling him that when he found the stage boss, he should stick it in the center of the ground, and if it seemed like they couldn't defeat the boss, he would signal them, and then it would begin. Park received the president's notification that they had started. Many days had already passed, and the criminal group had challenged the boss 3 times, still without any progress. There was a good chance that what Kim had said before was true, and he remembered that his god had warned him to be careful with him. He then informed the guard of his cell that he had some information about the mission and tried to ask to speak with the leader, but he refused. Kim wasn't someone to be ignored, but Joan's strength was the real power there. If he had to choose a side, he would certainly choose his. After thinking for a moment, the guard agreed to take him to the boss, and they went. While walking through the towers underground, Yun spotted a rat and crushed it with his hammer, commenting to the protagonist that, as he had said, it was a good idea for each of them to carry a lantern. Kim affirmed that he based it on the monsters being from the darkness in this area, which suggested they would be weak against light. The leader of the criminal group, in a fit of rage, punched the wall in front of him, questioning the power of that monster above him. That beast had been created to be undefeatable by humans, it was a basilisk. It was then that the guard entered his quarters, saying that Park wanted to say something to him. It was at this moment that he betrayed his old group, informing them that they were fighting the wrong monster, and that his former companions would be up against the real boss in the underground. The criminal group descended to the underground, intending to take revenge on the lie that had been told to them. They went down each floor, searching for anyone. The darkness made their path difficult, but they found Kim and Jisoo in front of them. The protagonist said they were a bit late, and that he thought they would be faster than this. They had reached the limit, so he told them to return. He then addressed Park, claiming that he knew he would betray them, but didn't expect him to be so predictable. However, as the protagonist was about to leave the scene, Juwon attacked him. But the protagonist was faster and attacked first, knocking him down along with his thugs. With that, they managed to escape, leaving them in Jisoo's care. The leader of the criminal group ordered his thugs to go after them, but Jisoo said that no one would leave that place without permission. Juwon noticed that she looked at them as if she had seen an insect, which made him furious. He commanded everyone to attack her, but all of them failed, and she killed them easily. One of the thugs attacked her from behind and stabbed her in the heart with a knife, but her regeneration ability treated it as if it were just a scratch. She then continued fighting them tirelessly. They kept coming, more and more, but all who appeared kept perishing before her. It was 30 of them against just one girl. The leader couldn't understand how she was handling all of them without even sweating. He then said that she was nothing he couldn't handle, since he was taller, bigger, and stronger than her, not to mention that he was the chosen avatar of Hades. He activated his ability called Death Sentence, which guaranteed a certain death in less than a minute. However, there were stronger people than the user. He then charged at her, but his presence meant nothing to her. He didn't make even the slightest difference in her eyes, and she finished him off by ripping his head off. Meanwhile, Mina ran alongside the protagonist. She asked if it was really okay to leave her behind like that. He replied, probably yes. The girl got angry, but he explained that it wasn't as if she was facing a formidable opponent or anything like that. The girl couldn't believe it because she had found the spy to be very strong, but he disagreed. They were still in the early stages of the game. Juwon Kim couldn't be an avatar for long. He probably only had the death sentence as his ability, and it took too long to activate. If he fought against Jisoo in the state she was in now, he would die before he could even use it. The girl asked what he was really planning, if he was truly going to the top. He confirmed it. She said she knew he was strong but questioned if it wasn't too much for him. He replied that was exactly why he brought her. She asked what kind of help she could offer, only being able to transform as her ability, but he said it was enough. The two then arrived at the gate. The protagonist asked her if she had done what he asked. She confirmed and asked how difficult it had been for her. She told him he'd better reward her well after this. He told her not to worry, he would buy her an item worth at least 2,000 points, and would add some extra rewards from the things they gathered after completing the level. This reward surprised her a bit, and she then put the plan into action by transforming into a weasel. When they entered the room, they encountered many of the thugs from that group petrified in front of them. They must have been petrified by the basilisk's petrification power. It was time for Mina to go look for the boss. She seemed worried, but he told her not to worry, to work hard and move quickly. However, she hid behind him, and when he looked up, he noticed the boss was right in front of him. This time, the boss spoke, introducing himself as Orga, and warned that his life would be forfeit if he didn't turn back. He asked him if he really thought he was going to leave. Unlike the Minotaur from the first stage, this one had a name. This wasn't just a sentinel put in the game as an obstacle, it was a named boss designed to be unbeatable. That's what a true sentinel was. His biggest problem at that moment was his petrification ability. When he opened his eyes, his ability activated, turning everything around him to stone. The protagonist had already planned how to prepare against this power, so he told the girl to put the plan into action. She then threw herself toward the basilisk, and taking advantage of the distraction, he charged at the monster. The basilisk's petrification ability had a delay between uses, so he had to strike her eyes during this short reaction time. He managed to reach one of her eyes, but a regular sword was not enough to pierce it. Now, Mina was his only chance, so she jumped into its eye and injured it. One good thing was that the attacks were now easier to perceive due to the basilisk's injured eye. However, even a scratch against them would likely be lethal. While the protagonist dodged its attacks, he asked the weasel if she remembered the signal they had agreed upon earlier. She confirmed, and they split up. The basilisk questioned why he kept using cheap tricks against it, but he responded by saying he wouldn't be able to beat this monster without those tricks. The basilisk replied that he wouldn't defeat it anyway. Even without its ability activated, it still couldn't be defeated. It then made one last charge at him. This wasn't good. He needed to do something before it was too late. He told the basilisk it talked too much, then snapped his fingers. This was the signal he had arranged with Mina to transform into a chicken, which was the basilisk's second and biggest weakness. The monster, stunned by its weakness, created an opening. The protagonist then charged at it with his dagger and tried to cut its body, but with no apparent success. He dodged another charge from the basilisk. He needed to finish this fight quickly. The creature asked what he was going to do now. He replied that it was right, he was going to defeat it. He confessed that he had known this from the beginning, and had been thinking about how to kill it the whole time. He was used to fighting against enemies that seemed impossible to defeat. He had done it countless times. He wondered what he needed to defeat someone superior to him. Would he need the power of the gods, a useful ability, or a deal? The basilisk lost its patience and charged at him again, but then a huge explosion shook the tower. The basilisk asked what had caused that. The protagonist answered that he had placed someone to plant bombs throughout the week. The basilisk asked if he thought bombs would kill it, or if he planned to make it fall. The protagonist confessed that he knew neither of those paths would work. But he added that he wasn't just wasting time and remarked that the monster was too slow to realize things. It was then that the basilisk noticed the bracelets on the protagonist's arms. Kim asked the monster if it had lost its mind under pressure. The things he had placed on his arms were called training bracelets, and by using a jewel he had managed to increase the weight of the bracelets to 10 tons. As the basilisk realized the weight of its arms, it was already too late. The protagonist was on top of it, and increased the weight of the bracelets again, causing the monster to fall. As the monster fell, the protagonist was confident it wouldn't die, as the level bosses didn't die from such insignificant physical contact. It was then that he realized someone had placed a golden spear in the center of the room where it was falling. He was worried for a moment, but convinced himself that since it was still the second mission, no one would have such a strong spear capable of killing. This quickly turned out to be another mistake. A message from the game appeared, saying they had successfully completed main mission number 2, and that the mission's rank was silver. The rewards would be distributed over time. He wondered why, even though he hadn't done anything, he had still earned a silver rank. Another message appeared, stating that from this point onward, the next mission would begin automatically after a certain period or when the requirements were met. A member of his group asked what he thought had happened to the others. He said he wasn't sure, but they all seemed fine. It was then that he saw the protagonist and wondered how he had defeated that creature without a scratch. Kim commented that he had made it fall exactly where he wanted it. The president thanked him, saying they wouldn't have been able to defeat those monsters without his help. This motivated him to get stronger. He asked the protagonist what he was going to do next. The protagonist replied that since they had some time before the third mission started, he planned to travel around a bit. He asked where, and he replied, "Wherever the road takes me," and told him to call if anything happened, warning that he would help if he wasn't particularly busy. The president said that this was probably a goodbye and mentioned that he could hire him if he needed anything. They then parted ways. Yun must have realized his limits based on this experience. He should be able to survive on his own until the 7th mission. Well, that probably wouldn't be a problem for him, since he had become a chosen avatar. The protagonist had forgotten to ask him which god had chosen him. He'd leave that for next time. Upon entering a shop, he ran into his friend. She commented that he had arrived earlier than she expected. He mentioned that it seemed like she had changed armor, and asked if it was due to its durability. She confirmed that the armor had been damaged when a spear was thrust into it. The protagonist tried to speak to Park, but he tried to charge at him, demanding that the thing she had put around his neck be removed and asking what it was. The protagonist replied that it was nothing special, just a fun bracelet. But in his case, it was a fun suffocator, and then he increased the weight of the bracelet, causing him to fall face first to the floor. Park asked what he had done to deserve this. The protagonist accused him of trying to kill everyone by keeping them in the academy during the first mission. On top of that, he had recently betrayed them. He added that Park hadn't even noticed that Mina was by his side, but it had worked in the end. However, the protagonist explained that it only worked because he was there. If it hadn't been for him, the criminal group would have achieved their goal. The return of the bracelet was just physical punishment for him. The protagonist had purchased an absolute contract in the DLC shop, and upon handing it to Park, the contract stated that the signatory must be altruistic, careful, and sincere from that moment onward, and failing to follow these rules would result in their death, via the implosion of their head through the bracelet. The protagonist commented that he would tolerate some violations of the contract up to a certain level. Park asked if the protagonist thought he was an idiot, but as he said this, Jisoo emanated her aura to intimidate him. Immediately, he grabbed the pen and signed the contract. The protagonist thanked him, saying he would see him later. Jisoo had opened her message about completing the mission and had received a gold rank. Now she had a lot of points due to the shared rewards among the group members. She asked where he was going, and he said he had a few places to visit and asked about her. She replied that she also needed to visit a place. He suggested that they split up, since now group members could locate each other. He asked if she knew how to do that, and she confirmed, saying she had already mastered the group system. The protagonist then spoke to Mina, calling her over to give her the promised reward. She got excited, and he handed her the stealth ring. This item allowed the user to completely hide, and this effect could be used twice a day, with a total duration of 1 hour. She was surprised it was a B-rank item, and seemed very happy with her prize. He noticed that Jisoo seemed a little sulky, and asked what had happened. She responded that it was nothing, and he said they would get one for her next time, promising that he could buy one just as good for her. That wasn't the reason she was upset, but she accepted it. Now that they had settled everything, it was time for them to get to work. It didn't make sense to stay there doing nothing. She asked where he was going, and he replied that he was just going to farm a bit. There were many observers around the protagonist. He thought it was natural due to the things he had done, but there was another one following. He asked the reason for it, and Mina asked if she didn't have permission to follow him. He replied that it wasn't that, but the real reason was that the observer with her was the worst of all. Nevertheless, he figured that one more observer wouldn't make much of a difference. He then asked why she was following him. She said it was because he seemed quite strong, and she would stay close to see if she could learn anything more. She added that she wouldn't just be a parasite, and if he needed her help, she would be there. As they neared an entrance, some strange people came out, asking who they were and claiming that the dungeon had already been taken and they should leave. The The protagonist said they were already leaving, and that there was no need to show their weapons. He then told Mina to get them out of there. She asked him if he hadn't just said he was going to farm in a dungeon. He confirmed and said that now that he knew where it was, he just needed to enter later. The people blocking their entry into the dungeon already seemed to know the entire area. She then asked how they had managed to get in. The young jester and an honest Life were watching, and Life questioned, saying that his avatar was nearby, asking if he knew anything. Jester denied it, and the other gods began talking about finding a good dungeon nearby and invited him to join them. The protagonist commented that there should be something there. Mina asked what he was talking about and questioned if he wasn't going to tell her anything. He responded that he was referring to the dungeon. She questioned him, saying that the entrance was in the opposite direction, and he said that he had told her he would make his own path. He then pressed his palm to the ground and used a skill called detection, which allowed the user to search for things in a 50-meter area with just their hand. He had gained a skill after defeating the basilisk. It was definitely worth it, since it was a platinum-level reward. They then went off to look for something else, and Mina kept questioning what they were looking for. He then responded that this was where the boss room was. She asked how they were going to get there since it was 20 meters below them. She asked if he would do the same thing he did against the basilisk, but then confirmed that it was only possible because it was a mission zone. Dungeons were protected by special magic, and their walls couldn't be destroyed or penetrated by physical force. The protagonist asked if it was her god who had told her that. She confirmed, saying that she had received a private message. He then took out a tool from his inventory called the Dungeon Destroyer Drill. She asked what that was, and how he got it. He lied, saying it was a mission reward. He then added some coating to its tip, and used it above the boss room. The girl asked when they would arrive, and he answered that it would probably take 2 hours. He asked her to take turns during the excavation, and she agreed but said she would charge extra rewards for that. 5 hours later, they finally reached the boss room and hit the right path. A message from the game appeared, saying they had just arrived at the heart of the dungeon. They were greeted by a group of praying mantises. Most of them were green, but there was one that stood out because of its size and red color. The girl asked if that was the boss, and he confirmed it seemed to be. They then gathered their group around the duo. Mina commented that she hated insects. Some smaller ones crossed his path, but he was able to easily dodge them and kill them without trouble. He thought to himself that this would be even easier if he just paid attention to the attacks coming from them, but more than that, insect monsters were vulnerable at their weak points, and he focused on hitting those. He then faced the boss, and the battle between them began. The protagonist had already planned what to do and aimed his spear at its head, throwing it and killing the boss. A game message appeared, saying that he was the first player to defeat this dungeon. And that was today's story. Did you like it? Then leave a like, comment on which stories you want to see next here. I'm always keeping an eye on and responding to comments and bringing the best stories. So that's it. Don't forget to subscribe and share with friends who also like manhwas.